friends and colleagues from around the region, with a special welcome to our colleagues and the students, staff, and faculty of the University of Guyana. My name is Donovan Walker, and I'm the president of the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations. On behalf of the 16 bar associations around the region, comprising OCCBA, as well as the OCCBA executive, it is indeed my pleasure to welcome you to this OCCBA distinguished lecture entitled the Honorable Sir Shridath Sonny Ramphal Distinguished Lecture. This evening, our distinguished lecturer, who will be appropriately introduced, is the Honorable Sir Ronald Sanders, and he will be speaking to us this evening on has the rule of law been replaced by might is right, defending sovereignty and promoting peace in the Caribbean. We really look forward to this timely lecture. For years, OCCBA has been, every year we do a distinguished lecture. And the pedagogy and the excellence in thought leadership has been wonderful. We presently have online hundreds of participants from around the region, as far south as Guyana, as far north as the Bahamas, as far west as Belize, and as far east as the OECS Islands. I am speaking to you from Jamaica, and if you permit me to say on behalf of the Jamaican Bar Association and your colleagues in Jamaica, we really want to extend the thanks and to let everyone know that we feel the love and support of all our colleagues throughout the region coming out of Hurricane Melissa. Those attorneys in Western Jamaica who still have no utilities are unable to join, but we will be sharing this lecture with them, and they will see it on social media shortly. But we just want to really express the love that we have been feeling. We also want to welcome members of the judiciary, members of the various political directorates in the region, honorable attorneys general, and we want to give a big shout out to our friends in the diaspora, in the United States, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, in the Commonwealth, who are watching this distinguished lecture. For those of you who do not know, very quickly, the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations is an amalgamation of law associations in the Commonwealth Caribbean, specifically the bars of Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Barbados, Bermuda, Belize, the British Virgin Islands, Dominica, the Cayman Islands, Grenada, Guyana, Jamaica, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Turks and Caicos Islands. Individual lawyers may also be members. We also do welcome our colleagues and friends from other bars, particularly in the Commonwealth, to join us. The main aim and objective of OCCBA is to be concerned with questions of human rights, justice, and the rule of law, the independence of the judiciary, the improvement of the administration of justice, legal education and legal pedagogy, the study of jurisprudence, legal literature, and law reporting, and also the establishment of legal aid throughout the region. In terms of legal education, this is why this distinguished lecture is so important. And we aim to encourage the participation of attorneys throughout the region in maintaining close relationships with other regional and international organizations, such as the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, the International Bar Association, and our friends at the OECS Bar. It's our goal to provide quality programs and services such as this distinguished lecture. We try to do so at no cost and to the benefit of attorneys throughout the region. I will add here that those attorneys in jurisdictions that have mandatory continuing legal professional development requirements, in particular Jamaica and Grenada, we intend to apply in Jamaica for CLPD accreditation for this lecture, likewise in Grenada. We will be issuing certificates of participation to all persons who have registered so that you can get your CLP accreditation. As I said, we really are trying to do this at minimal or certainly no cost to you, because I think it's important that the kind of learning and excellence and legal rigor that Ron Sanders, Sir Ronald will deliver to us this afternoon is important and well worth us listening to. The final point I want to make is that Sir Ronald has agreed to take questions, and those questions can either be typed in the chat for those online, and those at the University of Guyana, there will be a roving mic. So there will be a Q&A that will encourage and facilitate robust debate, intellectually stimulating discussion. And so we really thank Sir Ronald for this. I personally want to offer my congratulations to him because he's in Guyana, having last weekend received an honorary doctorate from the University of Guyana. And we at OCCBA are so very happy and proud for this well-deserved award. Thank you, University of Guyana, for hosting this or co-hosting this event. And now, I think I have said all I needed to say in terms of introductions, but I'm going to invite the Honorable Justice Kenneth Benjamin, who is at the University of Guyana, to say a few words of welcome on behalf of the University of Guyana. This particular agenda will continue unannounced. So just for those of you who are interested, after the Honorable Justice Kenneth Benjamin does his welcome, there will be remarks on the life and work of the Honorable Sir Shridath Sonny Ramphal, delivered by the distinguished President of the Guyana Bar Association, Mr. Kamal Ramkarran, who will thereafter introduce the Honorable Sir Ron Sanders to this, to deliver his lecture. We'll then hear the Sir Shridath Sonny Ramphal Distinguished Lecture, delivered by Sir Ronald. Thereafter, we'll have a Q&A co-moderated by Mr. Ruggles Ferguson, King's Counsel, online, and Mr. Kamal Ramkarran of the Guyana Bar, in person at the University of Guyana. We'll then do a vote of thanks to be delivered by Sherrie-Ann Bradshaw of OCCBA. She'll be doing this from Antigua. There will be OCCBA announcements by Zita Barnwell, and Zita is actually going to be doing this from St. Vincent. And I will have closing remarks and adjournment. So we will proceed without announcing each section. So it's now left for me to hand over to the Honorable Justice Kenneth Benjamin, Head of the Faculty of Law at the University of Guyana. Over to you, Justice Benjamin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. In your capacity as chairperson, I thank you for introducing me. I will stand on your protocol list. Just to mention that I need to recognize the Madam Vice Chancellor of the University of Guyana, who is online. I'd like to recognize my friend and colleague, Mr. Kamal Ramkarran, who's the President of the Bar Association of Guyana. And as I look into the audience...
Mrs. Benjamin is muted, University of Guyana. So we're not hearing him. Somebody will have to unmute. Good, I think it's unmuted now.
Yes, it is, yes. Yes, and I'd like to recognize Professor Compton Bourne, who's with us, having launched this book very successfully last Sunday. I'd like to recognize also Dr. Mark Curtin, Dr. Norwell Hines. Are you hearing me clearly, Mr. Ferguson?
Loud and clear.
Very
Loud
well.
and clear now.
Very well. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge Sir Ronald Saunders, Order of Excellence, Doctor of Laws, Honoris Causa of the University of Guyana. Now, the Office of the Vice Chancellor and the Faculty of Social Sciences through the Department of Law are pleased to be associated with this unique and stellar occasion. As unwittingly as the collaboration arose, and indeed it arose rather precipitously, the university is very pleased to join with the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations in hosting this lecture by an outstanding son of the Caribbean. This event comes on the heels of the conferral of by the University of Guyana upon Sir Ronald Saunders of the Doctor of Laws degree at the recent 59th convocation of the university on this very campus. The Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations is an entity of some vintage and pedigree, as it embraces the several bar associations stretching from Bermuda, down the island chain in the Caribbean Sea, and across the Belize and ending in the south with Guyana. Among its multifaceted objectives is support and preservation of the rule of law. This occasion is the most recent of the distinguished lecture series, styled appropriate on this occasion as the Sir Shridath Ramphal Distinguished Memorial Lecture. The topic is extremely thought-provoking and indeed timely, as our zone of peace here in the Caribbean is now the focus of global attention. In this 21st century, references to the rule of law have become more frequent and pervade discussions on any subject that touches and concerns democracy and the institutions that are set up for the preservation of democracy. When one speaks of the rule of law, there are many meanings ascribed by lawyers and laypersons alike. We can go back to Professor Dicey, who ascribed a number of meanings to the rule of law, two of which, most important, most prominent, are equality before the law and an established law of the land that is administered by ordinary courts. There are other meanings, and this was fleshed out in Lord Bingham's book entitled The Rule of Law that was published 6 months before his passing in 2010. It is fair to say that the rule of law is recognizable to all, but means something different to each and every person. Today offers a unique perspective that is cross-disciplinary from someone who has extensive experience in broadcast journalism, academia, and diplomacy. I have no doubt that everyone present and online awaits the offering with great anticipation. With those few words, I extend words of welcome on behalf of the Vice Chancellor and the University of Guyana to all of you at this distinguished lecture under the auspices of the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations. Thank you.
Students of the University of Guyana. As a newly minted Vice President of OCCBA, the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations of just over a month's vintage, It is my great honor and privilege to have been tasked, or you could say to have been thrown in at the deep end, by the President and Executive of OCCBA to speak this evening on the life and work of Sir Shridath Ramphal, the subject of this distinguished memorial lecture, as well as to introduce this evening's illustrious presenter, Sir Ronald Sanders. Sir Shridath lived a long life from the 3rd of October 1928 to the 30th of August 2024, almost 96 years, and he lived a full life. We could spend all evening marveling at his accomplishments and about his remarkable qualities, and yet not capture them all. Whole books have been written about him, of his speeches, and by him, and it was such a joy for me, in preparation for this evening, to read and browse those books to learn about Sir Shridath, having known only the bare bones of his life and work before. Having found them right there in front of me, I thought to myself, sure, we can read biographies of Shakespeare and Chaucer, but we must also know about our outsized heroes like Sir Shridath Ramphal, who is one among many others. I see another one here tonight at the University of Guyana, Professor Compton Bourne, Hold of the Order of Excellence of Guyana. Sir Shridath's capacity for alighting on opportunities, often entirely by chance, and then making the absolute best of them by charm, by persuasion, by the powers of his inimitable personality, and by his hard work and preparation, followed him throughout his life. Having completed his A-levels at Queen's College in Georgetown, he left for London to fulfill his father's injunction that he would do law, in tandem with his father, who went along not to accompany him as an escort, but also to fulfill his own lifelong dream to qualify as a barrister. Their intention was for Sir Shridath to go up to Leicester in the Midlands of England to do history and then law. But this was not to be. His father's school friend, a respectable London surgeon, told him in no uncertain terms that he must remain in London, emphasizing that it was important for his development to be in the metropolis. It was not in any event possible to do history and then law at Leicester, and Sir Shridath did some subjects for part 1 of the barrister's course at Gray's Inn, and although he felt sure after his interview with the dean that he could take King's off his list, he entered the second year of the LLB program at King's College London, then and now in the centre of London. At the end of the degree, he was extremely disappointed not to have obtained first-class honours, which only one other person at the university achieved, and he was made to understand that it was because he had done the first year externally. This spurred him on to do the LLM, which no one else in British Guyana had yet obtained. No doubt because of his charm, as well as his intellectual ability and his dedication to his work, the college was keen to have him continue, but finances were an issue. By chance, he came upon an advertisement in The Economist seeking a new type of barrister for the Colonial Legal Service. It entailed a 2-year pupillage in Chancery, as well as common law chambers, paid for by the Colonial Legal Services, and included a stipend which he considered generous. This allowed him to pursue the LLM, as well as to learn a great deal from his pupil master, who became his mentor, Dinglefoot, King's Counsel, at the common law chambers he went to after a chancery apprenticeship. Later, Sir Dinglefoot would be Solicitor General of England and Wales, and Foot's chambers were leading Privy Council chambers, and Foot himself was a leading Privy Council lawyer, with the whole Commonwealth passing through his office. Sir Shridath was able to learn a great deal during this pupillage. At the end of his pupillage, pursuant to the terms between him and the Colonial Legal Services, Sir Shridath was posted to Kenya as a magistrate. This was at the height of the Mau Mau uprising then ongoing in Kenya, and was an extremely undesirable use of his ability. When Sir Shridath explained his predicament to Dinglefoot, Dinglefoot called his friend the legal advisor to the colonial office and exploded that this was not the best use of Sir Shridath's many talents. As a footnote, I should tell you, some years later, in 1959, while acting as Attorney General, Sir Shridath was to save Muhammad Shahabuddin from a magisterial post out in the country to bring him to Georgetown as Crown Counsel. Dr. Shahabuddin later wrote seminal books in Guyana's legal system, was the Attorney General of Guyana himself, and became a judge of the International Court of Justice. So back to the story. While Dinglefoot offered Sir Shridath a place in his chambers and offered to pay back the colonial office for the pupillage, Sir Shridath did not feel that it would be fair to his family to remain in London. He had obligations yet in British Guyana. He was told by the legal advisor to the colonial office to hold on for a while, and in a few months, at the end of the year, he was appointed Crown Counsel in the office of the Attorney General of British Guyana. So back to British Guyana he came. He had started his studies at King's College in 1947 and was called to the bar from Gray's Inn in 1951. He returned to British Guyana in 1953. The period of his qualification as a lawyer and obtaining employment is a useful lesson to young lawyers and students, and that is the reason I've gone over that period at some length. It is important for us to recognize that he did not just pop out as the great Sir Shridath Ramphal, international statesman. He started off as in as ordinary circumstances as the rest of us, and he took the opportunities that presented themselves and made the best of them through his intellect, his charm, and his hard work. In 1958, Sir Shridath moved to Trinidad to join the federal government of the West Indies as a legal draftsman. But a year later, he returned to British Guyana to take up the position of Solicitor General of British Guyana. In 1961, he moved back to Trinidad to become the Assistant Attorney General of the Federation, where he played a large role in drafting the planned independence constitution of the Federation of the West Indies, which was set to become independent in 1962. Sadly, the Federation collapsed with the withdrawal of Jamaica, and in 1962, Sir Shridath left the Caribbean for a year to complete a Guggenheim Fellowship at Harvard Law School, after which he went to live and practice law in Jamaica with Harvey da Costa, who had been the Federal Attorney General and his boss. In 1964, Prime Minister Forbes Burnham, who had won the recent elections in a coalition with the United Force, invited Sir Shridath to return to British Guyana and become the Attorney General of British Guyana. Sir Shridath did not think that the challenge of drafting the independence constitution and shaping a new Guyana was an offer he could refuse, and he returned to British Guyana in 1965. Sir Shridath was to spend the next 10 years in government in Guyana, which became independent in May 1966. He was Minister of State for External Affairs, as well as Attorney General in 1967, and then became Minister of Foreign Affairs as the ministry was renamed in 1972. Sir Shridath was extremely effective in this position. In light of Venezuela's aggression towards Guyana, then as well as now, he and the government were able to raise Guyana's influence substantially in the world through the Non-Aligned Movement, the G77 group of developing countries at the United Nations, the establishment of the Caribbean Free Trade Association, CARIFTA, in 1968, which widened in 1973 to the Caribbean Community and Common Market, and through the signing of the Lomé Convention in 1973, which were a series of trade agreements between the European Union and its predecessor and the African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, which was spearheaded by the Caribbean and in particular by Sir Shridath. Professor Anthony Payne has described the creation of the ACP grouping as being very much Ramphal's triumph. Professor Payne said, "It was he more than any other person who was responsible for the creation of the ACP grouping," and he described the situation as follows. Speaking about Ramphal, he used the meeting of the foreign ministers of the Non-Aligned Movement that took place in Georgetown in August 1972 to convene informal talks amongst Commonwealth members present, some of them literally on the lawns of the Prime Minister's residence during a reception, and proposed the adoption of joint positions as far as possible in forthcoming association talks with the European Economic Community. Thereafter, he took a leading role in the negotiations in several key areas, and by common consent, conducted affairs with both skill and firmness throughout. The outcome was a set of terms that largely lived up to his stated ambition to deliver just, enlightened, and effective arrangements in future relations between the developed EEC countries and the developing ACP countries. Sir Shridath did such a good job as Foreign Minister of Guyana that his Assistant Secretary General, Moni Malhotra, recounted that in 1973, when Sir Shridath expressed his interest in standing for election as Secretary General of the Commonwealth, and his hope that India would support him, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who was taken aback, said, "You're doing such a fine job as Foreign Minister. Why would you want to move to the Commonwealth position? It will be a loss for all of us." Which foreign minister in the Caribbean today, we might ask ourselves, is as well known and influential internationally to get such a reaction from a world leader? On the 1st of July, 1975, at the age of 46, Sir Shridath was elected to great acclaim as the second Secretary General of the Commonwealth. Although he had achieved many great things by then, as you have heard, this was where he would shine and become the international statesman known throughout the world. His predecessor, Arnold Smith, the first Secretary General, was reportedly preoccupied with setting up the Secretariat and negotiating its status and privileges to much opposition. But it was Sir Shridath who made it into the international powerhouse that it is today. During his tenure of 15 years, from 1975 to 1990, he led the Commonwealth's global campaign against apartheid. He steered the Commonwealth's position on sporting sanctions against South Africa. He assisted in bringing democracy and the end of unilateral white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. And he sent a Commonwealth Eminent Persons Group into South Africa to help negotiate and end apartheid. By the time Sir Shridath was ending his tenure at the Commonwealth in 1990, he was able to receive Nelson Mandela at his official residence in London, months after his release from prison. Mandela would say about him that year that he is one of those men who have become famous because in their fight for human justice, they have chosen the entire world as their theater. By his engagement and action, Sir Shridath was able to reposition the Commonwealth as a modern, policy-driven body which championed small states and gave them a voice in the world, just as he had done for Guyana's foreign minister. He was also an early architect of global environmental governance, driving environmental policy long before it became fashionable in the world. Sir Shridath ended his tenure at the Commonwealth at the youthful age of 61, but that was not to be the end of his career as an international statesman. He was Chancellor of the Universities of Guyana, of Warwick, and of the West Indies. He was chairman of the West Indian Commission, aimed at taking the people of the West Indies into the 21st century, which produced a report of nearly 600 pages. He set up the regional negotiating machinery, the object of which was to set out a unified Caribbean response to international trade issues. He acted as a facilitator in the Belize-Guatemala border dispute. In 1997, he came to Guyana with Sir Alistair McIntyre and Sir Henry Ford to negotiate the Herdmanston Accord between President Janet Jagan and Leader of the Opposition and former President Desmond Hoyt, which led to substantial constitutional change in Guyana. In 2007, he led a team of some of the leading international lawyers in the world in a dispute between Guyana and Suriname at the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, which Guyana won the day before his 79th birthday. Between 2018 and his death, he was co-agent and counsel for Guyana in the International Court of Justice in the border controversy case between Guyana and Venezuela. Sir Shridath Ramphal, knighted on the 3rd of February 1970, and known to all before and after as Sonny, an extraordinary global statesman, was once just an ordinary boy playing cricket in New Amsterdam, Berbice, in Guyana. He was a little boy from the colonies who went on to occupy a major space in the world, and he dealt a blow to the vestiges of colonialism right from the body which brought together all of the ex-colonies. He is surely a fitting and proper person for our distinguished memorial lecture this evening. It is also my honor to introduce tonight His Excellency Sir Ronald Michael Saunders, our eminent and illustrious presenter this evening. Sir Ronald Saunders is Antigua and Barbuda's ambassador to the United States and permanent representative to the Organization of American States, posts he has held since 2015. He is the first person in OAS history to chair its permanent council 3 times, most recently in 2023, when he helped secure Guatemala's peaceful transition of government in January 2024. He has been a strong voice advocating for the interests of small states. A career diplomat, academic, and writer, he has served as High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Canada and as Ambassador to the World Trade Organization, where he led the only successful WTO case brought by a small state against the United States. He has served on the Second Eminent Persons Group, tasked with reform of the Commonwealth, as Rapporteur of the University of London Inquiry into Maintaining Commonwealth Studies on the Friends of the Democratic Charter, appointed by the late United States President Jimmy Carter, as an elected member of UNESCO's Executive Board. Sir Ronald has authored over 1,000 syndicated commentaries on the Caribbean, the Commonwealth, and Latin America in the global political economy. Sir Ronald's eminent service to the Caribbean and to the world has been recognized with international honors and accolades, including as Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, and as Knight Commander of the Nation of Antigua and Barbuda. He holds honorary doctorates from the University of the West Indies and recently from the University of Guyana. In 2025, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine awarded him the Order of Merit for his advocacy of the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sir Ronald Saunders.
Good evening, both to the audience here in the George Walker Theatre of the University of Guyana, and also to the many friends who are joining us online across the Caribbean at the invitation of the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations. Distinguished members of the organization, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, it was with some hesitation and not a little humility that I deliver a lecture on international law and sovereignty before so distinguished an audience. I am a practitioner of diplomacy who, for more than 4 decades, has had to wrestle with realities that often mock the aspirations of law. I dare to address you only because your president and past president invited me on the strength of my experience in many international theaters, contending for the rights of small states, and because this lecture is given in honor of a man who lived at the intersection of law and diplomacy, Sir Shridath Sonny Ramphal, who I was privileged to have as my mentor for half a century. Sir Shridath, as you heard, was a central architect of Caribbean integration and a committed advocate of international law. Born here in British Guyana in 1928 and trained at King's College London and Gray's Inn, he began in service to West Indian unity, first by drafting the constitution of the defunct West Indian Federation, and then the 1965 Carifta Agreement, which was signed at Dickinson Bay in Antigua, the seed from which the Treaty of Chaguaramas and CARICOM grew. As Attorney General and Foreign Minister, and later the Commonwealth, longest-serving Secretary General, he upheld law as both sword and shield against oppression, a shield for the powerless. Under his leadership, the Commonwealth became a force for moral action, confronting apartheid and racism, mobilizing support for Zimbabwe's independence, ending the rule of the white minority regime of Ian Smith on the basis of one man, one vote, and establishing the first Commonwealth Eminent Persons Group, which helped bring about Nelson Mandela's release and the end of apartheid in South Africa. As you heard earlier, Mandela would say of him later that he is one of those men who chose the entire world as his theater in the fight for human justice. For Sonny Ramphal, sovereignty was never the unfettered exercise of national power. It was interdependence on the law, the conviction that humanity's safety depends on international law to restrain power, to resolve disputes, and to define justice beyond borders. He helped advance the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, entrenching the oceans as the common heritage of all mankind. Within the Caribbean, he championed the Caribbean Court of Justice as both guardian of the revised CARICOM Treaty and symbol of regional maturity, insisting in his own unique style, and I will quote his words directly. He said, "Now that we have created our Caribbean Court of Justice in a manner that has won the respect and admiration of the common law world, it is an act of abysmal contrariety that we have withheld so substantially its appellate jurisdiction in favor of that of the Privy Council." I think those words tell you how strongly he felt about the need for the Caribbean to stand behind the Caribbean Court of Justice and not to loiter, in the words of Errol Barrow, on the parapets of the Privy Council where we did not belong. Sonny's faith was simple but audacious, that international law is civilization's conscience, the only universal language in which the strong and the small can speak as equals. His career was proof that law, rightly used, is the measure of moral power. In honoring his legacy, we affirm that for the powerful, sovereignty may be a sword, but for small states, it must remain a shield, forged in the discipline of law. I now set out the arguments I intend to make this evening and the conclusions that I wish to suggest. First, that while sovereignty in the modern order is both a right and a capacity, every state holds the right, but not all possess the capacity to exercise sovereignty freely. Second, the international system, while proclaiming sovereign equality, has long managed power rather than equalized it. And today, the powerful are stripping away the pretense that once sugar-coated the ugly truth. Nominal sovereignty, yes. The capacity to exercise it, no. Third, for small states, especially in the Caribbean, the defense of sovereignty rests not on force, but on law. Not on bravado, but on collective action. And fourth, that in this scenario, Caribbean states must move from individually wringing their hands to collectively holding their hands. They must create a concrete agenda by which the region can widen the space within which, using international law, they could restrain the imposed might of the powerful. From the birth of our nations in the Commonwealth Caribbean, we understood that sovereignty for small states is conditional, bounded by economic dependence, geography, and the will of the powerful. We invested not in armies and navies, but in principles set out in the charters of the United Nations and the Organization of American States, the International Convention of the Law of the Sea, the jurisprudence of human rights. In other words, we placed our faith in the proposition that international rules could restrain the strong and protect the weak, and that the 5 veto member states of the UN Security Council would exercise their privilege as a trust, not as a weapon. Yet, in practice, that veto has become a license for impunity in some cases, when the 5 veto members happen to offend the UN Charter, and paralysis when they fail to act to stop aggression in other parts of the world. When respect for principles and fulfillment of the obligations of the UN Charter are most needed, they are suspended by the very states that wrote them. The Council, the Security Council, that was designed to defend the weak, has too often become the instrument through which the strong escape restraint. For small states, this failure is not academic. The survival of small states depends on keeping faith with the UN Charter and with international law, however much both may be ignored from time to time by the powerful. If the guardians of the Charter will not uphold that balance, then it falls to those of us who still believe in the rule of law to defend it, not sometimes, but all the time, not for short-term political gain, but for sustainable protection. Here is a stark reality of what we all know to be true. In law, all states are equal. In practice, they are not. Sovereignty, as I said before, is both a right and a capacity. The right is universal. The capacity is unequal. Capacity is constrained by scale, by exposure to climate and financial shocks, by the lack of adequate capital and technology. The result is that legal sovereignty, the formal right to act autonomously, belongs to all, while political sovereignty, the power to act without permission, belongs to the few. Political sovereignty, the power to act without permission, belongs to the few. But the small and the weak cannot accept the diminution of law in the face of might. For law is their recourse and their ultimate shield. In 416 BCE, when the Athenians demanded the submission of the small island of Melos, the Melians pleaded for justice, for neutrality, for the right to exist. But Athens, confident in its strength, replied coldly, "The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must." In just those few words, Thucydides, an Athenian general and historian, in what he called the Melian Dialogue, captured in dramatic form a truth that still haunts the world, that power, unless restrained by law and conscience, will always find a justification for domination. After 2 millennia of conquest and empire, humanity's conscience rebelled. Out of the ashes of 2 world wars came the United Nations, the rule of international law, and the moral conviction that even the smallest states possess equal sovereignty. That was the promise of San Francisco, of the UN Charter, and later of the Commonwealth, a family of nations that Sir Shridath helped to shape into a moral community, not a hierarchy of might. Sir Shridath believed and often declared that law was civilization's answer to melos. In the Law of the Sea negotiations, he fought to make the oceans the common heritage of mankind, where no powerful state could claim dominion. In the campaign for a new international economic order, he argued that economic justice must replace economic coercion. And through the Commonwealth and international commissions on which he served throughout the 1980s, all 5 of them, concerned with development, disarmament, environment, security issues, and global governance, he showed that small nations could be the moral compass of the world. For us in the Caribbean, the Melian Dialogue ought not to be a relic of Greek history. It should be an episode we should avow never to allow to befall ourselves or any other powerless state. Incidentally, that is one of the reasons that I stood up for Ukraine against Russia, a small state which, through no provocation at all, was attacked by Russia on a campaign of expansion and subjugation. And I saw parallels, incidentally, between what was happening in Russia and Ukraine and what Venezuela was attempting to do in Guyana. So while I was motivated and deeply motivated to stand up for Ukraine, in part I was motivated by standing up for Guyana, because the principle was the same: a small country being besieged by a greedy neighbor. Now, small, open, and vulnerable economies live each day at the crossroads of power and principle. When the great systems of finance, trade, and climate action ignore our realities, the voice of that little island Melos that was subjugated by Athens echoes again, the plea of the weak to be heard amid the drumbeats of the strong. Our demand for climate justice is the sharpest expression of this post-Melian struggle. We in the Caribbean have contributed least to the climate crisis, yet we suffer most from its fury. Rising seas, more frequent and ferocious hurricanes, and drought are no longer merely acts of nature. They are failures of justice. To call for fair financing, loss and damage, and equitable access to adaptation resources is not to beg, it is to insist on law on justice and on moral duty, and on the survival of nations that did not cause this harm. And when small states act with resolve and together, the law answers. I give you the example. Confronted with the reality that the United Nations Conference of the Parties, that is popularly called COP, when that process was falling short, and the voluntary pledges by major emitters would not keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, small states acted not only in their own interest, but acted in the interest of the world. In 2022, the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law, which was founded by Antigua and Barbuda and another small island in the Pacific called Tuvalu, that organization brought the matter before the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. On May 21st, 2024, the tribunal declared greenhouse gas emissions to be pollution of the marine environment under the Law of the Sea Convention, and ruled that every state has a duty to prevent, reduce, and control such harm through national regulation, the best available science, and heightened action from the wealthiest emitters. That decision opened the way for another small state initiative, Vanuatu's request that the United Nations General Assembly seek an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. On the 23rd of July, 2025, the court answered in this way. States, all states, have a duty to prevent significant climate harm, to protect human rights endangered by climate impacts and breaches of those duties. They said breaches of those duties are internationally wrongful acts. That same year, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, responding to a request from Chile and Colombia, sang in harmony with the International Court of Justice. It declared that the right to a healthy environment includes the right to a stable climate, without which life, health, water, and self-determination all wither. The court held that states owe cross-border duties of prevention, that due diligence is not a box to tick, but a standard measured by foreseeable, irreversible harm, and that law binds not only governments, but the private power of corporations whose emissions drive this crisis. And it went further. Justice requires remedy. States must guarantee access to information, participation, and justice, must assess impacts before approving projects that heat the planet, and they must protect those most at risk: indigenous peoples, children, and coastal communities who are already living with the sea at their door. Together, the rulings of ITLOS and the ICJ, both of which incidentally, and those of you who are lawyers and law students would understand the importance of this, their decisions benefited from the unanimity of the judges. There was not one single dissenting opinion. And added to those two was the Inter-American Court. Together, they affirmed that survival is not a plea for sympathy, but a claim of a right. They widened the legal path for loss and damage and adaptation finance, and they remind the mighty that sovereignty without stewardship is a contradiction. Law is at last catching up with physics, and in that convergence, the powerless find a haven that encourages them to face the turbulent weather of our times. Yet we must be clear, these are still advisory opinions. They are not binding law. Small states have won the argument, but now they must confront entrenched power to give their judgments life beyond the courts. But whether all small states and other developing nations will join in that collective test of justice remains to be seen. The Caribbean knows better than most how power shapes the boundaries of our autonomy. When the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, began its harmful tax competition campaign in 1998, standards drafted by and for the interests of large economies were projected outward as universal obligations, and they were imposed on us here in the Caribbean, wrecking our financial services. In some cases, in some countries that had financial services, offshore banks, representing something like 98% of the banks in their countries, disappeared. Today, they're less than 2%. And how did they do that? Public blacklists attacked reputations, de-risking severed correspondent banking relations. The threat of financial isolation compelled compliance, even when there was no proportionate evidence of any wrongdoing. The European Union's list of non-cooperative jurisdictions, launched in 2016 and repeatedly revised, extended that same dynamic. The effect was not technical. It was imposition on sovereignty and its lack of equality in the exercise of it. Decisions about our financial architecture were no longer made in Georgetown or Bridgetown or Nassau or St. John's. They were made in Paris and in Brussels. The method has changed from that of empire, but the logic sounds damn familiar to me. Rating agencies, sanctions committees, and multilateral lenders now exert power once wielded by colonial administrations. Now, I don't say this to deny the importance of standards or of the fight against illicit financing. I say it to name a condition in which we find ourselves. And that condition is conditional sovereignty. Independence is respected only so long as we conform to standards set elsewhere by actors who bear little of our risk and none of our accountability. There is too a military dimension, though we have wisely refused to build our identity around armaments. We have no navies worthy of that name, no Air Force, no battleships. All that we rely on is law, on norms, and on alliances to keep our seas a commons of peace. That reliance was never naive, it was pragmatic. If the law fails, we have no fallback to force of any kind. CARICOM unity was intended to be the instrument by which we might widen our margins of autonomy. CARICOM, the movement, has achieved much, most of all, the moral habit of consultations, but it has not yet become the multiplier of power that our founders imagined. And that, incidentally, is not because the work to advise how that could be achieved was not done. Ramphal was an architect of that, and we are privileged to have another architect with us in this audience today, in Professor Compton Ward. These people did the work. Unfortunately, not implemented in the manner that might have taken the movement further. We seem to have forgotten the question posed to all Commonwealth Caribbean countries more than 70 years ago by Jamaica's Norman Manley, the grand advocate of a West Indian nation. He asked this question. I ask it of you now. Are we satisfied to be obscure and small nonentities in a world in which only larger groupings have the chance of success and survival? Or will we opt for a West Indian nation standing shoulder to shoulder with all the nations of the world? Well, we know what the answer was 70 years ago. Too often, short-term alignments with external interests have set member states of CARICOM at cross purposes with each other. Too often, leaders have allowed suspicion to erode solidarity. Yet, I tell you this, we would abandon integration at our peril. Every single one of our countries cannot abandon integration. Not Guyana with its newfound oil and wealth, not Jamaica with a large population, not any of the countries whose tourism is now driving their economies and who are doing much better. These are passing moments in the history of time. Even united, we will not match the material reach of the mighty. But united, we can at least insist that law be the common language in which power must speak to us. From the Treaty of Westphalia to the Charter of the United Nations, the international system has proclaimed the sovereign equality of states. In practice, as I've said over and over this evening, it has always been more aspiration than achievement. The political scientist, Stephen Krasner, named the paradigm organized hypocrisy. Great powers praise sovereignty in principle and violate it when convenient. The jurist Anthony Anghie traced the very concept of sovereignty to an imperial origin. Europeans designated the so-called civilized as sovereign and assigned others to tutelage. The categories changed their language, but not their function. What then is new at this time when multilateralism and international cooperation are being abandoned for unilateralism? Well, the hierarchy is still the same. It is only that bluntness has now become prominent. The mask of being nice has been torn away. The idea that we are actually talking with you is now being cast aside. The restraint that once obliged power to dress itself in the robes of law, the persuasion, the choreography of multilateralism, the respect paid to courts, even when losing, have all diminished. Treaties are treated as conveniences. Rulings of the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice are ignored. And I can cite you examples in recent months, but I suspect you know them just as well as I do. The pretense of constraint is abandoned. However, this is new only in its bluntness, not in the purposes that have always defined them. From the time of their independence, the plea of small states for special and differential treatment fell on deaf ears, ears that had grown deaf to the idea of development. I know it well. I labored in the vineyards of the World Trade Organization when we fought for special and differential treatment, and it never happened. I was in Brussels when the Eastern Caribbean lost the banana market because a president of the United States intervened on behalf of a large United States corporation that happened to be a rival producing bananas in other parts of the world. And overnight, the banana industry in the Caribbean was wiped away. And so too was the living of hundreds of people and their dependents. Now, in climate diplomacy, hard-won commitments to loss and damage funds were honored only in unfulfilled promises, not in compensation. Unfortunately, the people who manipulate the news, who present all these international conferences as great successes, do so with great skill. And they've got a lot of money behind them to encourage this. So every one of the COP meetings that are held, including this one, is being sold to us as if it's a great success. We've got this, we've got that. But guess what? That 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that was set, that would ensure that many of the islands of the Caribbean sink, and that where we are standing now may be on the water in another 30 years. That 1.5 degrees Celsius mark has been exceeded. Has been exceeded. There is no ocean in the world today that is not hotter than it was 10 years ago. And with each passing year, it gets worse. Some powerful countries simply choose now not to attend international meetings. They're not coming because they have nothing to tell you except that they don't believe in climate change. They have nothing to listen to you about because your pleas about climate change mean nothing to them. All of this points to an urgency for more, not less, integration in the Commonwealth Caribbean, for advocacy of more, not less, multilateralism, and more, not less, respect for international law and the upholding of it. Therefore, we come to the question before us tonight. Has the rule of law been replaced by might is right? There is now what two law professors at Yale University, Hathaway and Shapiro, have described as a cohesive assault on a long-standing principle of international law. The principle is this: that states are prohibited from threatening or using military force against other states to resolve disputes. We should know that in Guyana very well, because we've heard it time and again in relation to Venezuela. The professors have argued that this assault has been most obvious in Russia's war against Ukraine, but evident too in the threats by the US administration to use military force to seize Greenland and the Panama Canal. Within our region, the recent US military buildup directed at Venezuela, and Venezuela's own military threats and actions against Guyana are arguably violations of the UN Charter, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of another state. Now, in too many theaters of conflict, the principles of the UN Charter have been set aside for expediency. Territorial integrity is violated. Humanitarian law is mocked. International institutions are bypassed. The multilateral order, once humanity's shield, trembles under the weight of unilateralism and indifference. All of this confirms the conclusion of the political commentator and author Fareed Zakaria, that, and I will quote him, "The system that preserved relative peace and prosperity for 8 decades is not self-sustaining. It must be vigorously defended. And it must be vigorously defended most of all by the small states of the Caribbean, which have much to lose from its erosion." Since early September this year, the United States has used lethal force against small boats it alleges carry drug traffickers, with more than 80 persons reported killed, the majority in international waters shared by Caribbean states. Across the region and in Washington, many suspect the show of force is aimed less at interdiction and more at intimidation, or even at the precipitation of the overthrow of Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. Christopher Sabatini, senior fellow for Latin America at Chatham House, noted in the New York Times on the 1st of October that Venezuela accounts for very little of the cocaine entering the United States and almost none of the fentanyl trade, facts that at minimum complicate the scale of the US response. His conclusion was straightforward. This looks less like counter-narcotics cooperation and more like a return to gunboat diplomacy. On the 31st of October this year, the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, stated that these strikes violate international human rights law, and he called for them to stop. His office underscored the legal baseline. Outside armed conflict, international lethal force is lawful only as a last resort to confront an imminent threat to life. And even within conflict, distinction, necessity, and proportionality must govern. Those are standards. Publicly available facts do not appear to satisfy. Days later, reporting indicated that the US administration briefed Congress that the current legal opinions do not cover strikes on land targets inside Venezuela, and that new legal authority was being prepared. Frank Mora, a former colleague of mine at the Organization of American States and a former Assistant Secretary of Defense, warns that this shift from posture to purpose risks unraveling decades of consent-based security cooperation. And it bears recalling that under Article 6 of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, as authoritatively interpreted by the UN Human Rights Committee and reflected in the UN Basic Principles on the Use of Force, a state may not deliberately take life outside hostilities except to avert an imminent threat to life. If operations in waters shared by Caribbean states are to be justified, they must be justified in law, openly, and with regional consultation, not asserted first and retrofitted later. None of this, of course, denies the harm that narcotics do. But we have provisions for dealing with those things. We have had them for several years, including a shipwriters agreement, which gives the United States the right to join with our Coast Guard in hot pursuit of drug traffickers. And the law of the sea itself sets out the rules by which this might be done. It insists that cooperation be anchored in the UN's Charter rules on the use of force, which is self-defense or by self-defense or Security Council authorization, the OSS Charter of Non-Intervention, UNCLOS provisions on interdiction and hot pursuit, and the strict limits that international human rights law places on lethal force. The doctrine is simple. Enforcing criminal law at sea or on land is not war. Therefore, rules of war cannot apply. Now, no Commonwealth country should abandon that principle for political convenience, however tempting the short-term gain. Unless I sound, incidentally, as if I am somehow defending the regime of Nicolas Maduro, let me disabuse your minds of that completely. It is a principle of law that I argue for here, and a principle of international law. And we have to abide by those laws and uphold them, because one day we will need them. We need them now. If we violate them, if we allow them to be violated by others, then we can hardly use them as a shield if we ourselves are trying to use them as a sword. I come now to what I call a CARICOM contradiction. The US action exposed contradictions and conundrums that for 63 years have overshadowed CARICOM's efforts at united positions. The first of them is the description of CARICOM as a community of sovereign states. In reality, governments have often been more concerned with guarding individual sovereignty than they have been with protecting and projecting collective community. In the realm of low politics, if we have to decide on some candidate from some other country running for a UN position, we can happily come to a conclusion on that in very short order. But in high politics, relations with powerful states, especially the United States, there has been a marked unwillingness to harmonize positions. In high politics, individual sovereignty comes to the fore as each country seeks advantage for itself. Thus, in mid-October, heads of government issued a communique reaffirming what CARICOM as an institution has long held sacred, that the Caribbean must remain a zone of peace, that disputes are to be resolved by dialogue and not by force, and that every state's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be preserved within the bounds of international law. The Trinidad and Tobago government, however, reserved its position and soon renounced the stated position attributed to all other CARICOM states. Prime Minister Kamal Bissessa announced a foreign policy realignment and questioned CARICOM's reliability, justifying support for the US military deployment as a matter of national survival. Racked by violent crime, and Trinidad is racked by violent crime, narcotics trafficking, and it does have a great deal of narcotics trafficking, and gang warfare, and they do have considerable gang warfare. She argued that other Caribbean nations enjoyed the luxury of distance while her country bore the brunt of regional lawlessness. You know, we could argue the toss as to whether the rest of CARICOM is responsible for lawlessness in Trinidad and Tobago, or whether that derives from Trinidad and Tobago itself. Whatever the merits of the argument one way or the other, she faces that problem. And therefore, I understand intellectually and emotionally that she would take a position different from CARICOM and the rest of this, because she has a problem with which to deal. And therefore, in the expectation that the presence of the United States, or certainly its support, would help her to deal with that problem, becomes attractive. And in the exercise of her own sovereignty, that is the choice she made. The problem with that, however, is that when individual countries make collective sovereign decisions, which are never sustainable in the long run, good for the short term, sometimes, never good in the long term, they have weakened the collective sovereignty of CARICOM. And it is the collective sovereignty of CARICOM that gives us a place in the world. It isn't small islands in the Caribbean. It is not Guyana alone, despite oil and gas and being the fastest growing economy in the world. It's none of those things. These things are all transient. A moment in time. The reality remains the same. We are small, we are weak, and we are powerless. And our strength comes only from our unity and our collective sovereignty. Now, to continue what happened after the CARICOM statement and the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago's departure from it, her remark reverberated across the Caribbean and Latin America, especially, as you would expect, in Caracas. Venezuela accused Trinidad and Tobago of collusion with Washington and threatened to suspend bilateral energy agreements. It then went further. On the 15th of September 2025, Venezuela's Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez warned that his country would respond in legitimate defense to any attack launched from the territories of Guyana or Trinidad and Tobago, which he accused of acting on instructions from Washington. The heat of that moment got hotter. The tensions became more escalated, and worry spread throughout the Caribbean. Nobody in the region can afford a war in our waters, not least those tourism-dependent islands who have yachts and cruise ships of passengers, not people who have fishermen in the sea who go out to fish every day so that they can bring back sustenance to help us ensure food security and feed our people. It frightened people that this was happening. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez of Venezuela sharpened the warning. Do not dare, do not even think about it, she said. I sat next to Delcy Rodriguez in the Organization of American States for 2 years. She is a very small but very feisty woman, very strong personality, very threatening and intimidating person. I once sat in a room in the Permanent Council of the US in which she attacked every single country without exception. And when she was done, I said to her, Delcy, that was a marvelous performance. Who have you got left in this room that is your friends? What? It did not seem that she cared. I only relate that story to say that we should not discount the fierceness of the Venezuelan desire to themselves maintain their control of their situation. And I will say now something that I said at this university last Saturday. We should not believe, any of us, that a change in the regime in Venezuela will mean a change in Venezuelans' attitude to us. Because a virus, once in the body, grows and mutates. It may become something different, but the virus is still there. Therefore, Guyana has to continuously look at its alliances and its friends, particularly in the Commonwealth Caribbean, to be able to withstand not just the idea, not just the possibility of a military intervention, but also just the idea of it. The idea of it. Now, Trinidad and Tobago supports U.S. operations on the grounds of domestic security. Guyana supports them on grounds of the external threat from Venezuela. A few of the CARICOM leaders are silent, and others call for law, for respect, and demilitarization. The result of all of that is neither collective security nor collective sovereignty. The result of it is fragmentation. The zone of peace becomes a zone of interpretation. Whoever interprets it differently, but it's certainly not being interpreted in the same way by everybody. Now, this is the moment that Sir Shridath Ramphal foresaw when he warned that, and I quote him, "Small states cannot endure as fragments. They can only endure as part of something larger." He taught us that law must be both shield and discipline. Shield against domination, discipline against fear. Today, the greatest peril CARICOM faces is incoherence from within. When the small divide, we give an opportunity for the strong to decide. If the Caribbean cannot speak with one voice in defense of law, others will speak for us in the language of force. That is how sovereignty dies. It dies in acquiescence to power and weakness from division. The greatest challenge to CARICOM today, therefore, is to strengthen community in order to bolster sovereignty. While powerful states and groups of states have at times divided and ruled CARICOM countries, too many of the individual decisions of CARICOM states have been shaped by self-censorship. In other words, by anticipating what a powerful partner expects of them and acting accordingly, even if that means breaking ranks with the CARICOM collective. A more powerful country, incidentally, does not only mean a superpower. It includes any state on which individual CARICOM countries have developed critical dependencies that they place above their own collective relationship. In such conditions, sovereignty, the ability to act without coercion or without the anticipation of it, will continue to elude the Caribbean so long as each member state insists on unilateral prerogatives in matters of high politics. The remedy is not that there should be conformity of opinions, but constancy of the process, debate within the family, decisions made in council together, and speaking with one voice abroad. So Shridath Ramphal spent his life proving that law could be both shield and sword, but never a mask for coercion. In Southern Africa, he led the Commonwealth in sanctioning apartheid when many were still calling apartheid engagement. He understood that law without teeth is theater, so he sharpened the teeth, multilateral, proportionate, and moral. He championed the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which gave even the smallest island state jurisdiction over living and mineral resources. a say in the governments of the deep seabed, and a legal perimeter with which to steward creation in what is called its exclusive economic zone. He pioneered the Commonwealth's closed-door heads of government retreats, spaces in which people of power could be persuaded by reason and where tempers could be cooled and decisions made in a ripened atmosphere. He convened expert panels to arm leaders with usable knowledge on debt, on the environment, and on young people. I hate to single out Compton again, but he was one of those experts who served diligently to produce those reports. Ramphal's ethic was simple: stand on law, organize for impact, and act for justice. He insisted that while for the powerful sovereignty is a sword, for the small it must always remain a shield. The shield is not a plea for pity. It is a claim to dignity and a demand that conduct be measured against rules that bind everyone. If the shield falls, the small have no armor beneath. We are exposed. Now, this year marks 80 years since the adoption of the United Nations Charter. In that span, the world has evolved from discrete sovereignties to an intricate, fragile system of interdependence, where the shock of one reverberates through all. COVID-19 reminded us of that in a very powerful way. Poor and rich alike were subjected to that one little microbe that held us all in fear for almost a year and paralyzed our lives. Nobody was immune, and nobody was protected. In such a world, the creed that might makes right is not sustainable. Power without restraint breeds disorder, and coercion corrodes the stability on which all depend. The inward-looking nationalisms now re-emerging are not cures for complexity. They may enjoy a season of ascendancy, but the demands for raw materials that they do not produce and for skills and labor they do not possess will end in regression. And then the cycle will start all over again. For small states, interdependence has never been a choice. It has always been our starting point. We all became independent in the Caribbean within a framework of interdependence. The institutions we set up were part of that interdependence. The Caribbean Development Bank, the Caribbean Court of Justice, all of the things that we set up that made us able to do things in the world because we have them. The University of the West Indies, part of that. And one day we hope that the University of Guyana and the University of West Indies will get much closer than they are today in each of the interests of the universities and of the region. Therefore, in an age when power fragments and uncertainty multiplies, Caribbean integration is not romanticism, it is realism. It is the recognition that cooperation, stability, and predictability are not luxuries, but conditions of existence itself. Now, the inequality of sovereignty is the central contradiction of our time. A doctrine that proclaims equality, yet operates through hierarchy. It is visible, clearly visible, in the veto of the 5 states at the Security Council, in the dominance of wealthy shareholders over multilateral banks, in trade negotiations where capacity, not merit, decides outcomes, and in climate diplomacy where those least responsible for the crisis struggle most to find their survival. For small and vulnerable states, especially in the Caribbean and the Pacific, sovereignty is both precious and precarious. We face the paradox of dependence. That paradox is that we are compelled to engage in a global system to survive, and yet we are forced to make concessions that erode our autonomy. But we have little choice. Economic fragility, limited defense capacity, and exposure to climate and financial shocks narrow the practical meaning of our independence. Yet, it is precisely because of these vulnerabilities that sovereignty matters most. It affirms the moral equality of nations even when material equality is impossible. That is why Article 2.1 of the United Nations Charter remains vital. It affirms that the organization is based on the principle of the sovereign equality of all its members. Though often ignored, that clause is the lifeline that gives small states legitimacy in the international system. Today, new frontiers, digital sovereignty in the age of artificial intelligence, climate sovereignty, food sovereignty, reflect efforts to claim space in realms dominated by big corporations and major powers. Our sovereignty, therefore, must be asserted individually, but exercised collectively. Alone, individual sovereignty is easily quashed. Together, it has some leverage. For small states, survival depends on cooperation, not confrontation, on collective strength, not individual assertion. Regional and international alliances such as CARICOM, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and the Alliance of Small Island States, transform weakness into influence by allowing us to speak with one voice on climate, on debt, and on development finance. When that collective standing is exercised consistently and coherently, our nations give themselves the chance to live in dignity, with culture and identity intact. Now let me return to where I began, with Ramphal, and with the enduring paradox of sovereignty for small states. The international system was never built to equalize strength. It was built to keep strength in check. That is why sovereignty has always had two faces. In law, it proclaims a noble equality. Each state, large or small, vested with the same rights and duties under the Charter. In practice, it is filtered through the hard architecture of power, military reach, financial weight, and technological command. Now, this lecture has walked deliberately between these two understandings. The legal definition points to what should be, and that is sovereign equality, non-intervention, the peaceful settlement of disputes. But law will never abolish power politics. However, it can redirect it. It can tame the turbulence of international anarchy, guiding the struggle for advantage into forums, courts, and negotiations where reasoned argument replaces unrestrained force. But this does not grant small states the luxury of passivity. Our task is to insist, quietly and steadily, that law matters, that promises carry weight, and that rules apply as faithfully to those who craft them as to those who must live under them. Our task is not to bow before any new order that seeks to turn might into right, but to ensure that the old patterns of dominance never regain legitimacy. Caution has its place, but so too does courage. We must continue to affirm that law binds the powerful no less than the powerless, because if we cease to affirm it, we surrender the only shield we possessed. Sovereignty, at its core, is the freedom to choose one's path without coercion. For the powerful, that freedom is taken for granted. For the small, it must be protected, and it must be protected together. That is the real work of Caribbean integration today. And that is why, even when the storms rise around us, we must continue to stand on law and for law, not because law always shields us, but because without it, there is no ground left on which to stand. If the obliteration of tiny Melos by imperial Athens was the tragedy of a world without conscience, then the post-millennium world must be its redemption. Each generation must decide whether to live by Athens's cold maxim that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. We live by that? Or do we live by Sir Shridath's quiet certainty that true law, by which I mean real law, is not confined to charters or treaties. It lives wherever people choose fairness over force, peace over dominance, dignity over disdain. And so, as we honor Sir Shridath Ramphal tonight, let us renew our commitment to that conviction, that the strong need not do what they can, nor the weak suffer what they must, but that all of us, all nations, bound by justice, may walk as equals on the law. Sir Shridath taught us that small states can speak to great powers with dignity when they speak in the language of the law. So let us do so, calmly, firmly, together, and make the Caribbean not a stage for other people's power, but a platform for our voices raised in unison for our rights. It is a task for which the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations and its members, and all of you who are law students and practitioners of the law in this theater tonight, are well suited to ensure is implemented. Thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you, Sir Ron. And let me apologize for the others who have posed questions, and we regrettably, because of time, have not been able to get to them. What I can say generally, though, is that I believe Sir Ron has expanded his fan base in the region after this evening's lecture, given the comments coming from the virtual space, and I'm sure the physical space. Enlightening, stimulating, invigorating, thought-provoking are all the descriptions used for this lecture. And just to say that this is an inspiration to the bar associations. These are rule of law issues, and it is really a call to action for the bar associations, OCCBA, the OECS bar, and the constituent bar associations to rise to the occasion to confront this issue. Thank you. I think over to Sherrie-Ann.
Thank you, Ronald. Good evening, all. I wish to adopt all protocols previously mentioned. As we come to the conclusion of this enlightening topic delivered by Ambassador Sir Ronald Michael Saunders, it is my privilege to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of OCCBA. I am here before you today to express our heartfelt gratitude and extend a warm vote of thanks to our esteemed guest speaker, Ambassador Sir Ronald Saunders, who presented the timely and important topic, has the rule of law been replaced by might is right, defending sovereignty and promoting peace in the Caribbean? First and foremost, we'd like to express our deepest appreciation to Sir Ronald for taking time out of his busy schedule and for gracing this occasion with his presence, especially in the evening. Your remarkable knowledge, passion, and dedication as it relates to the rule of law and continued education of that concept to all have captivated and enlightened us throughout your presentation. We're truly grateful for the valuable information and unique perspectives you have shared with us. Your eloquent and engaging delivery kept us all riveted, and your ability to simplify complex concepts made the subject matter accessible to everyone in the audience. Your expertise on the topic is truly commendable, and we are fortunate to have had the opportunity to learn from you this evening. We would also like to extend our sincere gratitude for the time and effort you have invested in preparing for this presentation. Your meticulous research, attention to detail, and commitment to delivering a thought-provoking and impactful talk are evident in every word you spoke. The topic is a great highlight, and that was evident from the feedback we received, to mention a few. Excellent presentation, very enlightening presentation, profound, powerful, stimulating, timely. Your dedication to your craft is truly inspiring, and it serves as a shining example for all of us. We wish you continued success in all future endeavors. I think we can all say that resonating from this lecture, unity is strength and sovereignty matters most. We'd also like to express our gratitude to LAT technical support team and OCPA executive who have played a significant role in making this event a success. Their support, coordination, and efforts behind the scenes have been instrumental in bringing everything together seamlessly. From planning and logistics to promotion and coordination, your unwavering dedication and commitment to excellence have made this event a resounding success. We are immensely grateful for your hard work and perseverance. To our audience, we express our heartfelt thanks for being here today and for actively engaging with our guest speaker. Your enthusiasm, curiosity, and thought provoking questions have made this event more enriching. Your presence has added immense value to this gathering, and we hope that you have found the session as enlightening and inspiring as we have. In conclusion, all I can say is thank you once again to one and all.
President speak.
Zita?
Next slide.
Zita? Good.
Right
Yes.
here. Thank you. Thank you, Casey. Good evening, everyone. I am Zita Barnwell, Secretary of OCCBA, and a warm greeting and welcome from the Grenadines. I wish to take this opportunity to say thank you as well for attending. But my main role here tonight is to give a few updates in regards to OCCBA's work. So the first thing I'd like to know, there are 4 things that I would like you to know, an update in terms of OCCBA's work. Our final, we do publish a biannual journal, and our final edition is on track for publication by the end of December this year. I also want to use this opportunity to sincerely thank all those lawyers who take the time out of their busy schedule to make submissions. And I also want to use this opportunity to encourage further submissions from other persons who have never yet submitted to OCCBA. The good news for attorneys from Grenada and Jamaica, those of you who are attending this lecture tonight, we are so pleased to let you know that this lecture qualifies for continuing professional development credits. So certainly it's more worthwhile that you have attended this wonderful and intellectually stimulating lecture tonight. The third thing I'd like you to know is that I'm giving you a very most gentle and friendly reminder for those bars who have not yet paid up their dues, and we'd like you to ensure that you do so. These funds do go a long way in assisting us to put on events of this type. And just to remind you that the subscription is $100 US per year. And finally, just to let you know, our next OCCBA event, which is scheduled in late January 2026, will be our OCCBA Award and Continuing Legal Education event, which we have, I think, biannually. Yes, we do. And we look forward to welcoming all of you who have never attended one, and we look forward to welcoming those who usually attend them to these intellectually stimulating events that OCCBA usually hold. That's all for now. Thank you again, as Sharon has said, for attending this lecture. Over to you, Ruggles.
Thank you so much,
Done. Yes.
Zita. Thank you so much, everyone. My friends in Guyana, I really want to thank the University of Guyana and the team in Guyana for hosting Sir Ronald in such fine style. The OCCBA has a plaque for presentation to Sir Ron, and President Kamal, I now invite you to present the OCCBA plaque to Sir Ronald. Wonderful. Congratulations. I've seen a number of comments in the chat. There are a number of people, Sir Ronald, who have asked if a copy of your presentation can be made available. Yes, so Sir Ronald, I was just asking if a copy of your lecture can be available. A number of persons online have asked, including media houses. So I am just taking the opportunity to ask you if the recording will be available. And or the presentation, the written presentation.
I think the university will could make the recorded presentation available.
Yes.
The written presentation, without the things I ad-libbed, which I did, I'm afraid, I can send to you within an hour.
Wonderful. And we thank you for that. And we will widely circulate it. The comments online have been amazing. Just to let you know, Sir Ronald, and my friends and colleagues at the University of Guyana, that we had over 300 registrants online and over 300 participated during the course of the evening. It has been amazing that you were able, Sir Ronald, to gather such a wide regional interest. There were people from all over the Caribbean and the wider diaspora. And as I think Ruggles said, and I'm seeing in the comments, you have made new friends, and I'm sure that there are more people after this evening that will be listening to you. We just sent you by email our letter of thanks on behalf of OCCBA. We wish you safe travels home, and we look forward to hearing you speak on other issues. OCCBA is grateful for you and for your time and for your intellect, your work and worth. And with that, I say to everyone in the region, in Guyana, all the way up to the Bahamas, thank you for listening, thank you for tuning in, and we wish everyone a wonderful night and a wonderful holiday seasons. Stay safe, friends and colleagues, and good night to everyone. Thank you,
Good
Sir
night.
Ronald.
Good night.